Good morning, everybody. If you'd like to take your seats. I now know that my cue to start talking, not stalking, we don't want any of that in this room, is when the lights go down. Maybe the lights going down helpful after what might have been a late night for a few people, I suggest. But anyway, welcome back to day 2 of the summit. Hope you had a great dinner last night. We have got a packed schedule ahead of our lunch today with speeches from the new Home Secretary, the Shadow Home Secretary very shortly, and the first interview with the new DPP, Stephen Parkinson. Plus, we've got some more of those great lightning talks from forces around the UK and some fascinating panels too, not least one on fake news and disinformation. And welcome to everyone joining us once more online. We're looking forward to hearing your questions too, and just a reminder to keep those coming during our sessions so I can put your questions to the panellists and to our speakers today. We've changed the schedule a bit for this morning, as you know, so please make sure that you've checked all the details on the Summit app. We will be taking a shorter coffee break to squeeze everything in. And before we get going, I just need to let the QE2 run their safety announcement once more.
Welcome to the QE2 Centre. Please take a moment to listen to the following safety message. There is no planned fire drill taking place today. And in the unlikely event of an evacuation, we ask that you make your way to the ground floor by the nearest available exit. We've got fire wardens on hand to assist you. If you require assistance, please do ensure your event organiser is aware of this. Please do not stop to collect personal belongings or use the lift.
So thank you to the QE2 for that. Just a bit of a reminder that the hashtag for the conference, if you'd like to put messages out on X or on Insta or whatever, is hashtag PoliceConf23. We're very grateful for everybody who completed the survey on the app last night, and there's a wider one for the conclusion of the summit a bit later, so please make sure that you give us all the feedback to make sure we do things in different ways if you'd like to see it differently, or different emphasis next time round would be great. Now we're just about to start with one of our main speeches, but I'm not quite sure if the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, is here quite yet. I'm looking for a little sign from Gemma at the side. So what I'm going to do is busk it for a moment, and I'm going to invite the PCC for South Wales, Alan Michael, to join me whilst we await the arrival of the Shadow Home Secretary. I'm not quite sure if he is here, even within view. Just be careful, because I could ask any one of you in this situation to join me on the platform for a conversation. I can't quite see him. He's probably outside waiting. Somebody's nodding. He's outside waiting for the Shadow Home Secretary. Okay, well, I will do a few seconds looking ahead to some of the areas that I suspect we will be hearing from our speakers this morning. Very interesting to hear from the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, shortly, because after the vote in the House last night, they lost clearly one of their key frontbenchers, shadow frontbenchers, who campaigns and works very hard against violence against women and girls, Jess Phillips. So it'll be interesting to see what she has to say about the impact of losing such a key figure with just months to go, potentially, till a general election. It'll be interesting to see what she has to say potentially on protests too. Not least given what we heard last night that happened to one of the memorials after the vote. No doubt she'll be telling us more about Labour's plans for policing. So lots to think about and anticipate with the Shadow Home Secretary. We're then going to be having a panel after the lightning talks on fake news and disinformation. Some really interesting voices on that to listen to, not least with the enormous rise online of hate speech, which has been monitored very closely, of course, by many of your colleagues working in policing, but also within government too, and within various agencies who presumably feed in that information to the work that you are doing to try to counter some of the speech that is out there. So lots to hear from the panellists on that. Then we are hoping to hear from the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly, who will be joining us. Some of you may have heard him on a whistle-stop interview round this morning. He was talking clearly about Rwanda, but of course, given the political events of the last week, it'll be very interesting to see what he has to say on the issues of the marches and the protests too. Some of you may be looking for some bridge building as a result of that speech, so let's just see if tonally things change, if factually things change. I'm so glad to see Alan Michael, I can't tell you. Would you like to come and have a word, Alan? Is she here? You can just take over. I'm going to sit down. Thank you, Alan.
You're going to stay.
I talk. I open the fridge door, light comes on, I can do 2 minutes. Take it away, Alan.
Being asked to ad-lib at this stage of the conference is an interesting way of approaching the day. Yvette is on her way, as you can imagine. Being Home Secretary or Shadow Home Secretary is pretty exciting in this sort of week. Parliament is one of those places, a bit like policing really, where nothing happens for ages and then years happen in a day or two, and you see a great deal of change. And I think it's going to be really good for us to hear from Yvette as the Shadow Home Secretary. I'm tempted to say showing a degree of stability that others can only dream of. Firstly, Yvette is a former ministerial and cabinet colleague, so she's somebody I enormously respect. And I can speak from experience of her professionalism, her focus on getting things done, and her way of working in a cooperative style. You'll not be surprised to know, because again, it's the same in policing. There are certain people who, when you work with, there's a collaborative, getting things done approach, and there are others that it's more difficult to work with. Yvette was one of those people that was a pleasure to work with. She works in a cooperative style to address big issues. The second thing that's interesting in her role now and the potential as Home Secretary is having been the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee for a number of years. I was a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee for a period towards the end of my time in Parliament, doing it the wrong way round, because you meant to do Select Committee at the beginning. Yvette's done it the wrong way round as well. But what that gives her is a lot of insights in the inquiries, because the Home Affairs Committee comes at things from left field. It'll pick up a big topic, it'll ask questions, it'll interview people, it'll look to get different insights. So having that sort of independent focus on home affairs subjects, including policing, will be really of great benefit in the role that she's in now. And if I waffled on enough to allow the Shadow Home Secretary to come on stage, because the third thing is that she's developing for the world of the 2020s a vision of how to deliver on Robert Peel's first priority for policing and justice, to prevent crime and harm, not least by getting fresh energy into community safety partnerships. Something, do you mind me mentioning again, that we're already doing in Wales, of course. And if Yvette becomes Home Secretary, I know that she'll be demanding of the police, but also respectful of policing in England and Wales. So please welcome the Shadow Home Secretary, the Right Honourable Yvette Cooper MP.
Thank you very much. Can I thank Alan for the welcome? And actually, maybe I better put my cup of tea down somewhere. Apologies, I was given it as I walked in the door. Thank you so much for having me this morning. It is a great pleasure to be here and to see all of you and to be here at what has been, let's be honest, a turbulent time for the relationship between police and politics. And I'm now shadowing my 6th Home Secretary. I'm not sure if that says more about me or about them, but it is the 8th Conservative Home Secretary in 8 years. And that is not good for policing. It's not good for Home Affairs, and it's not good for the country. And we've got a level of chaos which I think has added to what really for a long time has been not a strong enough sense of purpose around and vision around policing from the Home Office at a time when we know that policing faces such great challenges, greater complexity when crime is changing so fast. But I particularly wanted to be here to say thank you, to your officers, to your staff, because the additional pressures in recent weeks have been particularly complex and challenging. We've seen the distress and the tensions in many communities as a result of the devastating events unfolding in the Middle East. The appalling rise in anti-Semitism, the awful increase in Islamophobia. And when all of us must be vigilant to ensure that events unfolding internationally don't play out in increasing tensions here at home, I've seen immensely important work being done by police forces all across the country, reassurance patrols, the visits to synagogues, to Jewish schools, to mosques, the work that the Met and other forces are doing with the Community Security Trust, with Tel Mama. It's really important and it's impressive. The community engagement at its best, with officers working locally to reassure, to pursue hate crimes, to keep people safe, and those neighbourhood policing programmes recognising the importance of that reassurance work. And then, of course, having to manage the large-scale protests at the same time as public events like Remembrance, ensuring that you can keep order, can keep people safe, and can operate within the law. And doing so, of course, in a world of social media where every single event and incident is scrutinised and is under the spotlight of a camera. So, of course, you and your officers won't get everything right, but you are doing impressive and important work, true to the traditions of British policing, impartial, without fear and favour, respecting and embedded in communities, upholding the law. So I particularly want to give thanks and pay tribute to all the officers who worked in very difficult circumstances last weekend, protecting the cenotaph, ensuring that Remembrance and Armistice events went ahead, having to obviously manage complex public order issues, having still to be working to go after awful anti-Semitic incidents, but also having to operate in the face of the most appalling and ugly scenes of far-right groups deliberately attacking the police. And I want to say and send my best wishes for a speedy recovery to all the officers who were injured. We never take for granted the work each officer does each day and the risks they take to keep the rest of us safe. So let me just particularly thank all of you, and especially to thank Mark Rowley and the Metropolitan Police and all the forces who've been providing mutual aid. You have a tough job. You need backing, not attacking, in the job that you do. And I'll be clear, the attacks on you by Suella Braverman were a total disgrace. Suella Braverman is not Home Secretary anymore, rightly. And I think you'll be hearing from the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly, very soon. I expect he will take a very different approach. But this is actually too important just to move on and dismiss this as an aberration. Because I said repeatedly in the comments that I made on the disgraceful Suella Braverman article, no Home Secretary ever before would ever have done this. And that's true. But now a Home Secretary has done this. And we cannot let this spiral into a spiral of disrespect between policing and between the Home Office ministers who need to work with them. We cannot allow a kind of carelessness towards our independent institutions, particularly policing that needs to keep us safe, but towards the rule of law as well. Because this is not just about Suella Braverman's article. The Prime Minister obviously chose to appoint and to back the Home Secretary, but he also got drawn into her approach, putting public and theatrical pressure on the Met Commissioner for the sake of headlines. I believe that was irresponsible. The Policing Minister also tried to defend the claim that the police pick favourites. That isn't good enough. The Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party yesterday was calling on the government to break the law. That isn't good enough. There is a responsibility on the Prime Minister, on the Home Secretary, and on ministers across the government to uphold the law, but also to uphold respect for the law and respect for the police, the crucial institution that has to make sure that the law is upheld across the country. And I think there have been too many years of carelessness in the approach to those crucial institutions. So that is why Labour will take a clearly strongly different approach. I am worried that we cannot allow our country to just get drawn downwards into what effectively becomes a Trumpian spiral of disrespect. We need to stand up for the rule of law and for independent policing. Labour will do that. We will back the police and we will always defend our British policing model. We're proud of it and we will protect it. That idea that the police execute their duties independently without fear or favour, the Peelian principle of seeking to preserve public confidence, not by pandering to the public, to political opinion, but constantly demonstrating absolutely impartial service to the law. It's policing by consent, the idea that police are the public are the police, and those ideas are foundational, not just to policing, but to democracy, and rely on delicate bonds of trust and confidence. And as Gavin has said last week, of course, with operational independence comes accountability, but the accountability cannot function without independence. So that is why Labour will protect those fundamental traditions, the fundamental respect for the rule of law. But actually, we know it's not enough just to say that's what the Labour Party will do. It's not enough to have just one party defending those policing traditions. This has to be cross-party. So whilst we will make that commitment that we will do so, we will also work with police and crime commissioners of all parties, and we will challenge other parties too to maintain that respect for the impartiality and the operational independence of the police. This is on all of us working with all of you. All of us need to hold this together. The challenges over the last few weeks are more acute because they come against a backdrop that is challenging for policing. And I've talked many times, many of you have talked many times about the perfect storm that policing faces, with crime changing so rapidly, requiring new expertise, tools and capacity at a time when we know that actually policing doesn't have the level of technology in order to keep up with fast-changing crimes. Crime is also becoming more complex, from online fraud to child sexual exploitation. And also, the police are still picking up the pieces for so many other areas where things go wrong. Public protection and safeguarding, where other services fail, from mental health to child protection. The scale of cuts to policing after 2010 are still being felt, and we still have 10,000 fewer neighbourhood police and PCSOs on our streets, and communities feel that, as well as the loss of experience. And we've had the big drop of confidence in policing, reflecting a mix of things from lack of visible policing, falling charge rates, and also some of the deep concerns about individual cases of standards not being maintained. And I think we've had a lack of proper national leadership to deal with those challenges, to provide that direction, to work with you. The Home Office for too long has been hands-off and happy either first as a deliberate choice after 2010, but then more recently, perhaps more as a result of chaos. But there has been the deliberate choice to pull back from a Home Office playing an active partnership role just when it's needed most. We've seen as a result some of the concerns that we have raised about serious violence being increasing, knife crime killing our children, the real concerns about safeguarding and the serious cases of persistent violence against women and girls. The National Crime Agency warning about increases in serious organised crime in recent years. And at local community level, the increase in town centre crime, the 25% increase in shoplifting, and also the increases we've seen in criminal damage and assaults against shop workers. That hits right at the heart of communities, at people's real perception of whether they can feel secure and safe in their own lives, if their own town centre, their own place where they would go just to get a pint of milk, just to go shopping, just to go meet a friend for coffee, doesn't feel as safe anymore, then that has an impact on people's whole lives. And of course, the problems in the criminal justice system, the long delays, the number of victims dropping out, and the real serious problems with the low levels of charges, the big drop in the charge rate. We know that sometimes we'll hear ministers say everything's fine, which it clearly isn't, or they'll say if it's not fine, it's other people's fault, which again, it isn't. Again, this is a partnership and we will take a different approach. So Labour has set out a crime mission. Keir Starmer has set out his intention that we will have a mission-driven government, and the purpose of having a mission on crime is that this will be something that all organisations, that government, different departments of government, all agencies, including the police but going way beyond the police, will be part of and will see as the purpose of the next Labour government and the next 10 years if Labour is elected. And that mission is to halve serious violence and also to restore confidence in policing. Confidence and harm, trust and crime, the two sides of the issues that so many police forces deal with. So that means to halve knife crime, to halve the level of violence against women and girls, and also to restore confidence in policing and reverse the collapse in the charge rate. That means we need new partnerships to do so. And to give you one example of a new partnership that we want to put in place to tackle serious violence, we know our young people have been increasingly drawn into crime, county lines, and criminal gangs. We've seen real concerns around antisocial behaviour. We've seen the impact of COVID and the impact in local communities with the rise in mental health crisis for our young people. And so many of those issues not being addressed in local areas. Some of the violence reduction units that I know police and crime commissioners are involved in, many forces are involved in, have been doing some really important and innovative work to tackle youth crime and to tackle knife crime at the local level. But we want to go much broader than that. We want to be able to bring all local services together around young people, around our teenagers, to work on prevention, to bring neighbourhood policing together with social services, together with youth services, together with our schools. In the last Labour government, I was one of the ministers responsible for the Sure Start programme for the under-5s. And its whole principle was about bringing services together around families rather than having families pushed from pillar to post, and looking at prevention for everyone, but also with the most targeted help for those in need. Now we want to do the same, that same Sure Start approach for our teenagers, to prevent crime, to have neighbourhood policing, working with youth hubs. We have the funding for 100 youth hubs across the country. We want to work with the violence reduction units that have already been started, the police and crime commissioners, but also with local councils, with local police forces across the country, because our young people have the right to feel safe, the right to feel listened to, and the right to get help when they need it before they get drawn into dangerous crime. But we also need action to restore neighbourhood policing. If we're going to restore confidence in policing, it has to start with neighbourhood policing. I've talked about that many times before. The importance of rebuilding that community connection. It's not just patrols on the street, it's also about that problem solving, working with communities, using modern data and technology, the hotspot policing and responding to that, but also being able to build up those relationships, that trust and that local intelligence as well. And particularly that is about our town centres. In Castleford town centre, we've had significant challenges with antisocial behaviour and shoplifting, just as many other town centres have for a long time. We have worked closely with the local council and with the local police. We've got extra neighbourhood police patrols into Castleford town centre, and it's made a big difference. It's made a big difference to the number of crimes being reported. But it's not rocket science. And we need that focus on keeping our town centres safe and on neighbourhood policing. And that's why at the centre of our mission is a plan for 13,000 more neighbourhood police and PCSOs back in neighbourhood teams, funded by a new police efficiency programme that is based on the work of the Police Foundation, bringing together procurement and shared services to make sure that we can get that money back onto the front line, keeping our communities safe. And also, as we try and restore confidence in policing, means restoring the effectiveness of the criminal justice system, making sure that when crimes are committed, there are consequences. For too often, people feel no one comes or nothing is done. That is the confidence we need to turn around. But again, that means working together. We set up a charging commission to bring together former Chief Constable, Crown prosecutors, chaired by Dame Vera Baird. And I wanted to thank many of you, many of the forces who have sent in evidence to that charging commission. The work is underway at the moment. But what's really striking from the evidence that has come in is how much it paints a story of services that were hit by a huge scale of cuts that then shrank into themselves and stopped working together. And also a lack of troubleshooting, a lack of Home Office engagement, a lack of government engagement to troubleshoot the problems that then arose. One of the pieces of evidence that was sent to us described how a prosecutor who'd been working for the CPS for 3 years said, although they dealt all the time through emails, they hadn't actually spoken to a police officer for 3 years. So those human conversations that can be the ways that we troubleshoot problems just not happening in services that end up being under strain, but also end up with no leadership to pull them together and to get them working properly. We have said one of the things already we would change is the ridiculous redaction rules that mean that too many of your officers just spend hours and hours redacting files in order to be sent to the CPS, in order for the CPS to say, actually, there's not enough evidence anyway, and they may not be charged anyway. And you just go round in circles, and it's a huge amount of additional bureaucracy, effectively the equivalent of having an officer stuck in an office with a bottle of Tipp-Ex for hours and hours and on end when they should be out on the street. So we will change those rules. We'll change that if it needs legislation to do so, then we will do so if Labour gets elected. But I would urge the government to get it sorted out beforehand. We'll work with you too to raise standards. That includes individual standards around vetting, around misconduct, but we also need to raise standards for forces as well. And back when I was the chair of the Select Committee, I remember finding it deeply frustrating. We would ask about recommendations that had been made that had never actually been implemented, be they recommendations from the IPC, recommendations from the Inspectorate, and nobody even had any track of what those recommendations were. Now, implementing those recommendations is a responsibility for police and crime commissioners, but where we have areas where we have persistent failures within forces, other services in education and health have improvement regimes. We don't have the same for police forces. So that is why we will support some of the recommendations that were made by the Police Inspectorate to give new powers of direction in cases where there is persistent failures to the Inspectorate with additional safeguards from the Home Secretary, but to make sure that we've got mechanisms to make sure failure is tackled and to make sure that all forces can raise to the standard of the best, and we can be sure that together we are making sure that communities aren't let down. And then I wanted to say just two final things. One is about the workforce and the police workforce. We know, and I know that you have work underway through the MPCC and others about improving technology, and there'll be much that we want to do around the modern technology that police forces need and the coordination of technology between forces. But we also can't ever forget that, like the NHS, policing is about people. And it's that people relationship that matters more than anything else. It's why neighbourhood policing is so important. It's also the contact with the victims, the trust that is built, the connections that are made. And policing will always be, at its heart, a people profession. But that means we have to support the workforce, we have to value the workforce, and we have to plan for the kind of workforce that we need for the future as well. So that's why Labour will set out a proper workforce strategy within the Home Office if we are elected, why we will work too on making sure the police covenant is a reality, that there is proper mental health support in place for police officers under pressure, that we look at the different skills, the very different skills and recruitment that we need, and also that we make sure that as we make changes to the lifetime allowance on pensions, we ensure that police officers get the same kind of protection as the NHS so that we can make sure we sustain our senior leadership, and also to bring in the proper bravery medal for those who lose their lives giving their service to keep the rest of us safe. And then I want to finally finish just where I started, which is talking about the work right now in communities, because there's many things that we want to do together, and we believe that any government should be doing together with policing about addressing issues around workforce, issues around charging, issues around neighbourhood policing, some of the things that are about long-term rebuilding of confidence. But we also have to respond to some of the immediate challenges and pressures that we face right now. And the rise in anti-Semitism, the rise in Islamophobia, and the potential for extremists to exploit tensions is serious. And there has to be a much broader response. It's not just about the individual responses to individual crimes, although we should be clear, there is never any place for violence or hate crime on Britain's streets. But it's also got to be about the prevention work and the resilience work too. That's why we are calling for the restoring of proper monitoring of Islamophobic and hate crime incidents, not just hate crimes, as a result of the increased tensions right now. Why we're calling for a new hate crime strategy because the task force was not renewed after 2020. And also to look again at hateful extremism in the light of the work that Mark Rowley and Sarah Khan did as well, to look at the threshold for stirring up hatred offences, and to make sure too that the government responds to the Louise Casey report on community cohesion and has a broader approach to cohesion and countering extremism. We need a new countering extremism strategy to make sure that no one is able to exploit the tensions that we face. But in the end, all of this is about us coming together, about bringing communities together, about the police, politics, local communities, PCCs, all working together. Because we have a shared imperative to keep our country safe, to ensure that the security of our streets is above party politics, and to make sure that we do so in the very best traditions of that British policing model of which all of us are so proud. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sorry, it's rather a long walk across. Good to see you, Shadow Home Secretary. And thanks for joining us slightly earlier. You were very accommodating with our slightly tightened schedule this morning. We've got questions already.